All right, nice. So welcome to the fifth meeting of the Nixpkgs architecture team. As always, for now, I'm recording on YouTube, taking meeting notes on the usual notepad. I'll take meeting notes today and also lead the meeting. Starting off, member updates. We have M. Kaito or Chris applying since last week to the team. He can't join today because he's sick, but so I think let's defer the decision until he's here next time and discuss this in the next week. There's no other member updates than kind of summarizing quickly from the discussions since last week. For one, there was a discussion started by Prof. Patch about him wanting for the Nixpkgs team to kind of ensure some backwards compatibility guarantees regarding Nix. So that, for example, there's like a guarantee that Nix has to be stable for 2 years until Nixpkgs can switch to such a version, which kind of means that from now we can't use unstable features in Nix. One of those that was talked about is the impure derivations in Nix, which just were added like half a year ago or so. And also it's only available for Nix space build commands, not Nix dash build commands, which would break backwards compatibility in a way. In the past, we've also seen this with what is called the placeholder feature in Nix. This was added to Nix, and fairly quickly, it was also people started using this in Nixpkgs, which then led to some problems where people couldn't. People were still running old NixOS versions with an old Nix version and couldn't evaluate the new Nixpkgs versions, so they couldn't update their NixOS system anymore, and changes had to be reverted there. And I think we ended up at like a year of stability period there, which isn't a lot, but better than like immediately.
The other thing with impure is I think it's also behind a feature flag.
Right, yeah, it's an experimental feature in Nix still.
So there's like 3 layers of can't use it yet.
Yeah, and so the discussion evolved a bit from there. An entire separate matrix channel was started, kind of from a kind of Nixpkgs people feeling that the Nix developers don't really listen to the needs and don't really interact with them a whole lot, like as if there's 2 different groups, the Nix developers and the Nixpkgs developers. Some discussion was started in the other channel. One of the main takeaways from there was that there isn't really a Nix developer team. There is no kind of body that says where Nix goes, which direction Nix goes. Mainly, it was just kind of various people implementing things, mainly Eelco in a lot of ways. But there's also Theophan to mainly implement the C8 derivations and does other things with Nix. Yeah, and so that was kind of cleared up a bunch of things, and I think some fruitful discussion were had there. Yeah, so that's one thing that happened then. And from this, Prof. Patch then mentioned that he thinks the Nixpkgs team should establish some use cases for Nixpkgs for the start, so that we know what to expect from Nixpkgs or how users use Nixpkgs. I think that sounds like a good idea. I'm not entirely sure how to go about this. I think many of these use cases are kind of fairly obvious because we use Nixpkgs all the time and have them in mind, but probably good to write them down. Then also something else that was mentioned was that the whole discussion about replacing bash kind of got a bit out of hand, that this wasn't something super interesting for a start, that there's more better problems to address first. And one of the main ones that kind of came up was the improvement of the phases mechanism, which currently is implemented with bash, but it's very hard to override. This also ties into the whole package builders approach, the Python, the Perl builders, and so on, which currently aren't very composable. But maybe the phases mechanism could be extended to somehow allow that to be better. I think that's a very good idea. And then finally, one last thing that happened was that Robert and NBP, discussed an issue of renaming some Nexus module terms, some module system terms like option definitions and declarations, which are a bit ambiguous. We haven't really discussed NixOS in this team, but I guess it's also Nixpkgs, and if there are bigger issues there, or issues that need a bigger decision, it might also be in scope for this team. Yeah. All right. So yeah, that's, I think, a good summary from the discussions. Does anybody have anything to add there? Alessia, I saw you maybe wanted to say something, or anybody else as well?
No, I clicked the wrong button.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So I think that's good.
Thank you for that summary.
Yeah, no problem. All right. Yeah, Robert mentions Nixpkgs does use module system. That's true. With I believe the
config pulse audio stuff.
Oh, with pulse audio as well.
No? Yeah, I know there's a bunch of like config.pulse audio, and then.
But that doesn't use the module system, does it?
No, it doesn't. No. But I think there are some, at least the types are used in Nixpkgs for, I think the meta checking at least, though the full module system isn't used there. But yeah, it is. I mean, NixOS is also part of Nixpkgs, so it's also in scope to some degree. But yeah, I think maybe let's quickly see if anybody wants to tell us about something they looked at in the past week, or any updates, or something you think is worth talking about that happened. All right, fairly quiet. I myself also didn't have a lot of time, so no big updates for me. I will. I do think probably one of the most important things to discuss is the kind of phases thing, but then again, that's more of an exploration. That's does anybody know of an alternative phase implementation that anybody has developed in the past? If so, we could kind of use this as some pre-existing work and go from there. I don't know any like that. All right, also fairly quiet. Then
I guess most build systems have like an equivalent, like just looking at package build stuff for Arch and APK build for Alpine, they generally have sections where they do install bits or build stuff. So I mean, same thing probably for Homebrew and Ruby. So we might be able to pick some of that stuff up. But it seems to be whatever main language they're using is where you define what you're going to be doing, and then within that, at least for like package build and APK build, within that it'll be a chunk of bash or whatever. I don't know if anyone's ever played with doing the phases kind of more in Nix and then still having chunks of bash, but the bash that gets run is composed together by Nix.
Yeah, one of the main problems to think about is how to compose that properly, which most of these other build system declarations don't have to worry about, because you just have a single declaration there. You can't override anything generally. But with Nix, you want to be like override anything for any declaration, and then you want to override the overrides, and I think that's really where the main complexity comes in.
There is another build system I'm roughly aware of that supports tons of different like ways of configuring how you build. It's called like T2 Linux. I haven't looked into it very much, but before you do a build, it seems like you configure your builder so you can make it use Clang, or then you can swap to GCC. You can turn off XYZ feature. It's typically, you configure it before running the build, and then that will apply. I don't know if there's anything like within the definition that would change that, but there'll be stuff within the definition that is turned on or off based on those configuration values.
Yeah, what
so there
was
might
it
be
called?
something there. As T2 Linux, I'm not sure what the builder's called. I know there's like a nice command. It's just nice. I don't know if that's the name of the builder. It's something I've fairly recently come across.
Yeah. Then we also have Alyssa mentioning in the chat packages, PKGSRC package source has phases. I wrote that down in the meeting notes. Would be good to just look at pre-existing work there to see if someone has something better than we have in Nixpkgs.
I also hear a lot of people saying with Gen 2 you can enable kind of global configuration values, like compile everything with whatever speed enhancing settings that you can turn on. I don't know how kind of composable Gen 2 stuff is because I've never looked at it, but there might be something there as well.
Oh, with the feature, or that's not feature flags. Use flags.
That's what they call them. Use flags.
Yeah. Actually, there is a Nixpkgs PR which kind of tries to have a Gen 2 use flag similar system for Nixpkgs configuration, which actually just uses the module system. But it's really old, but the idea is really good. Never made it all the way though. Quickly going through the chat, there's Robert and Alyssa talking a bit. Robert mentioned that maybe users don't need to call run hook. Yeah, the use flags are more about configuring features. Yeah, and that would be equivalent to in Nixpkgs, the kind of arguments to a package file with like enable GUI, enable YouTube or something. All right. Yeah, but I think I mean we can discuss more there. But if we don't have a lead to go on, and nobody has done a big exploration of this, I don't think talking much about this has a lot of value. We really need to look at it closely first. Also goes into the whole technical discussion versus just updates a bit.
How do use flags compare to the common like enable whatever argument to the builder?
I'm thinking the enable arguments in Nixpkgs are generally very simple as like true false flags or like a single string or something like that. They generally don't allow for kind of bigger customizations like adding build inputs or overriding phases, things like that. So you could almost like if you had a GUI and you could like flip some switches there. Whereas other override mechanisms are very freeform and generally allow passing arbitrary nicks. Does it make sense?
I guess so. I've seen some enable arguments that like pull in other dependencies and stuff like that.
Yeah, right. So it's a simple interface, but underneath it can do more complex things. I guess it's which actually kind of reminds me of Nixos modules in general, where you can enable something and then it does something wild underneath.
One thing that I that just popped into my head is there's some packages that are actually configurable through the Nixpkgs dot whatever in your NixOS config. So like your NixOS config can affect the like arguments that are passed into packages. And I think that's kind of inconsistent and weird because it doesn't apply to a lot of packages. That's like off topic, but I figured I wanted to note it.
Yeah, that's a good point. This tends to be sometimes useful when you have like global flags, like whether I don't know, I think one of them is whether X is enabled. Oh, actually no, whether Pulse Audio is enabled. I think, but yeah, that's really only as useful as all the packages that actually make use of these global flags, which isn't a whole lot.
It might be interesting to have packages be able to expose those feature flags in a more consistent way. since that mechanism actually, now that I'm thinking of it, is like pretty convenient, but the fact that only a few packages make use of it, I'm thinking of Mumble, I think, where you can enable speech support. And I think Wine lets you set the whether it's 64-bit or whatever. So maybe letting packages declare those in a more meaningful way instead of just as overrides. And
Yeah, I agree. That would be very useful. To some degree, I actually made a PR that at least allows you to get the arguments to like the things you can override with like lib.function args, but it's a bit hacky and not super visible. But yeah, definitely something we should do. We are straying a bit from the kind of phases mechanism, but I guess it goes a bit in the same direction, just about overrideability in general. But I think the phases mechanism is more about build time overrideability, whereas the kind of feature flags are more evaluation time override. Although I guess they go hand in hand when eval time can kind of the phases were specified at eval time, which they are to some degree, except the run hooks, I think. Well, no, they're it's a bit messy, but yeah, I guess it goes a bit hand in hand. Quickly want to read the chat here. Robert mentions that use flags make caches less useful. Exponential combinations. It's a good point. Also relates to the feature flags. Then then closure size is obviously also.
It's interesting to see Robert and Alyssa have those different perspectives on the embedded space. I've used Gentoo and use flags for shipping an embedded system or a system that we cared about making really small. And so, for example, one of the use flags for the Linux firmware package lets you save. It's called saved config, and it lets you. I mean, it's a mechanism to override what firmware you keep. So currently Linux firmware is like 500 or 700 megabytes or something, and our board only needed one file. So using that use flag, it's just like overriding. Let me override down to keep one file that's a few megabytes instead of 700. I actually am prototyping that with NixOS, and so I, had to override the Linux firmware package, and I just, essentially recreated what that use flag did with a patch. So it's just different ways of doing it, at least for specific package customization.
Yeah, I think both arguments have like it's not that we do need some feature flags, but we also should like make sure they're cacheable to some degree. There's also the idea of having a instead of enabling or disabling flags, you can also say that you don't care about whether the flag is enabled or not, which can improve caching a bit. Where Next could somehow try to find a version that's cached, no matter then because some flags you don't care about certain flags, can choose a bit more freely there. But yeah, certainly both use cases have their place. Yeah, Jay Tojnar mentioned that, yeah, caching a single default is good compromise. And right, I'm also reminded that sometimes we cache multiple defaults, like 2 different versions when there's like some different use cases. And yeah, seems like people have reached a conclusion that let's keep the status quo, since that's decent. All right, but yeah, so feature flags, I think really the main 2 takeaways here is that, for one, the feature flags should be more exposed. I think that's definitely a good idea. I think nobody would argue against that. It's just not something that's possible in Nixpkgs currently, or not inspectable. The other is that how do feature flags tie into the whole overrideability and phases mechanism? I think that really takes some time to look into. Right, and then also arguably the global configuration flags would also be good to expose. And actually the PR I mentioned, which adds like use flags to Nixpkgs by like just using the module system for nixpkgs.config, that would expose these options in a better way, because you have the module system docs which you can write, and then you actually have it rendered like which specific nixpkgs.config flags are available. I'm now feeling that we should like almost save the chat somewhere, because there's a lot of good discussion happening there, but it's not really backed up anywhere. Oh, does the chat get streamed? I am not sure. Yeah, no, it doesn't get streamed.
Maybe we should
copy paste into meeting notes, if we can remember that in the end. That sounds good.
Yeah, or if it's not too long, then we can just read out the question or statement.
I have a maybe catch-up question about phases. What is there discussion from the previous meetings where phases are discussed that I could read to catch up?
Yeah, all the meeting notes are in the repository. I can't quite remember. I don't think. Well, just towards the end, I think we briefly discussed phases last week. But yeah, it's also in the right. It's in the meetings repository with all the notes. Yeah. Otherwise, I think let's maybe move on a bit from this. I think we can. Let's quickly go to the discussion about the naming of the definition and declaration for Nexus modules, started by Robert. Robert, are you here and can you speak?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. So I think, well, Alyssa mentioned in the chat that that's a really good idea. Something I was asking myself is, how needed is that? I haven't seen many people being confused about definitions and declarations, but I'd love to hear some like other stories there, because there is a very sizable cost to changing one of these. But right, there's also the suggestion of just doing a light rebranding, like instead of definitions, let's call them values. something like that, which is also kind of already almost the case. But yeah, like changing the name a lot has a sizable cost to it.
Yeah, so this is mostly from my personal experience learning about the module system way back when. And yeah, I don't think we'll want to replace these terms absolutely everywhere. But I think they're quite ambiguous in their use in like natural language in English. The meanings are quite similar. So that doesn't really help with learning. So I think it's probably okay to keep it the way it is. But I've noticed recently when I was writing documentation that I tend to refer to things as config values rather than config definitions. So I thought it was worth exploring whether the terminology could be well either replaced or supplemented by some terms that are a bit more obvious.
Yeah, and Alyssa mentions that it's mainly just an internal name used, and I think that's a good point. It's mainly about a documentation change, I guess you'd say.
Yeah.
All right. But yeah, I think personally, I think that's a good idea. I think
A similar thing came up in the docs call about the difference between a package and a derivation, and is it the DRV file versus the thing that you build out and all that. So yeah, it's a cross everything Nix problem, kind of reuse of terms.
yeah. But yeah, I think that's so. Just my preliminary intuition about this is that we can do this. It's a fairly easy change since it doesn't involve a lot of things, mainly documentation change, and I'd personally be on board with doing some renaming, but we do need to find a good one. NBP and Robert were asking for suggestions in the channel, and there's also a GitHub issue about this to further discuss various names. But yeah, I guess this goes in light with this is kind of the same discussion with general renamings in the Nix ecosystem to make stuff clearer, which I think is a good idea. Yeah, Alyssa mentions derivation is a very overloaded term. Yes.
Packages even more overloaded.
Yeah, right. Packages sometimes mean derivations and as well. All right. I think let's move on from that if nobody else wants to say something about that.
I just posted a link to a Nix issue where I tried to define package. That was focusing mostly on it being an attribute set with stuff like meta, which is very much a non-derivation aspect of a package. And there's a couple of other things, but it might be interesting to check.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, and I guess this also might be a bit more towards the documentation team effort, but about doing large or like bigger renamings of terms. I think that might be interesting there as well. We have All right. NPP suggests that we could use the matrix channel for chatting during the meeting, so that we don't have this duplicate chat in Jitsi and matrix. Don't have to copy anything anywhere. I think sounds good. Anybody have any reservations against that? All right.
Would we use a thread for that, or are we going to avoid threads because it's like a new feature?
I've heard the threads. Yeah, Alyssa mentions that her client doesn't support threads. Yeah, maybe let's just, I don't really mind. Let's use whatever's most comfortable. If you want to, I don't know, let's have single discussions in a thread if you want to.
Does Jitsi support widgets or something?
I do not know.
You could embed a matrix widget in the Jitsi room.
Oh, that would be key.
We had something like that for Nixpkgs 2020. We just had a web page that we made with like, I guess you just embed Jitsi on one side and Matrix on the other or something. I don't remember exactly the details.
We could embed this Jitsi call in the matrix room.
We could use like, doesn't Matrix have voice channels now or something?
Yeah, but that's an element specific thing currently.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's essentially using Jitsi.
Other clients, it just shows up as a room with a Jitsi widget. It's not as like integrated.
I think let's have the discussion for where to have chats, maybe in the chat. Let's try to talk a bit more about issues for Nixpkgs. John Erickson joined like 10 minutes ago. John, do you have something you wanted to mention? I'd also just quickly want to mention that maybe you can apply to the team officially still.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to mention. My apologies for not doing that yet.
No problem.
I was going to mention it. Yeah, I'm still late because some work things and doing other things, so I have nothing to add right now, but want to at least loiter here.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, then right. Well, I think probably it's best to so I guess in general, what do you think this team should focus on for now? Personally, I think the phases mechanism, improving the package builders would be one of the best approaches. But what do you think? Do you think that's a good idea? Do you think other things are more important?
There's a couple pain points for me. I don't know if they'd be particularly useful to tackle first, but the fact that the GoBuilder is a bit of a pain in the butt and you cannot override it at all is very annoying. Again, I don't think that's something we should tackle very early, or if at all, if that's more of a Go team kind of thing.
That actually does seem like kind of the same thing as phases. I guess with phases and package builder modularity.
Yeah, so with the Go one, it uses phases directly and specifically writes bash functions. So if you overwrite the build phase, you lose all the functions. Whereas the Rust builder has everything converted over to hooks, and that one works a lot better. But
yeah. Then
that might be
related.
relevant to the phases part.
Yeah. I think it's mostly the same thing. Quickly, when I mentioned, Alyssa mentions that Rust platform.build Rust package should be gotten rid of. Also, I think that's related to phases. Ideally, we wouldn't need any of these specialized package builders. But yeah, someone did talk, and I kind of talked over them. Also, Gitis wants to talk.
I think that was me. So I have a question. Do we have anything else to talk about? I feel like we're at the stage where we just need some MVPs or something.
I think that sounds about right. I am looking through, or trying to keep up with the matrix channel. Build Rust crate. NBP mentions what should we focus on? Removing make derivation calls from within Nix packages to solve all override issues. This would cause different style between within Nix packages and outside Nix packages, but bring overlays closer to Nix packages. Removing make derivation calls from within Nix packages to solve all override issues. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that, but I mean, it somehow sounds a bit similar to, well, removing make derivation, I guess that's replacing it with something else. Oh, links to
I think what he's referring to is like removing the Haskell generic builder, which calls make derivation, right, from within packages, as an example.
My guess was like maybe every package returns the attributes, like the arguments to make derivation rather than actually running it. But I might be wrong. I'm just completely guessing.
Right. I think that's it. He linked to the RFC number 3, which, if I remember correctly, is about that kind of passing arguments around instead of actually applied functions. Whether that's it is something, another suggestion to look at. I personally think that's a really big thing to do, but it would be in scope for this team. I'll link to the RFC and read through it.
One thing that's really annoying with overrides, and I don't think would be solved by that, is when parts of an expression depend on, or like with recursive stuff, if you have like something that depends on the version and then you change the version, all of the places where version gets substituted into like strings and read by the evaluation don't get updated. So
yeah, that's a bit weird. It took me a while to get used to that.
It becomes like necessary to duplicate a lot of code or just patch the thing in Nixpkgs. Is there a way that we could fix that?
I think that this would fix that, because you'd be changing the attribute set before it's then built, whereas the override attributes thing is it's like evaluated half and then changed.
But what if the original attribute set is like evaluated first? Like you would just be overriding the same thing, right? Like you would you would have an attribute set that's already fully evaluated.
Yeah, actually, you're right. I guess it could be a function that takes inputs, but then how do you feed those inputs?
I guess that we would need some kind of explicit mechanism for like self-dependent package declarations.
Right, and actually, Jan mentions or links to Robert's PR, which actually adds that, and it is already merged in Nixpkgs. It allows make derivation to have a self argument to refer to its final attributes.
Awesome.
I guess one good question is whether this should actually be the preferred style for all of Nixpkgs. I guess since it is make derivation, we don't, since we try to get away from make derivation, we don't need to care too much about this, since the new way won't have to depend on this. But maybe the style might be the same. So it'd still be a good question.
Weren't we moving towards just make derivation, not having like other builders? I'm kind of confused.
I think it shouldn't be stdnf.make derivation anymore at that point. It should have a new name, like build derivation, something very generic, and not be specific to stdnf either.
So the idea here was to completely replace make derivation, not fix other builders like we started discussing here. And I would like to note that like the way Rust does it, like with hooks, that's just one way of composability. Like you could introduce something like module system or something.
Wait, I didn't fully get that. So the module, so like with the Nix's module system for
so everyone
builder
is
elements?
just set on hooks as the one and only way to compose builders, and I'm just saying that's just one of the ways. That's all.
Yeah, right. Ideally, with an improvement on phases, this would also be improved. Like, I don't think hooks is a good way to override phases. Hopefully, we can find a better mechanism there.
I agree.
If we're gonna get rid of the build thing, the other builders, the language specific ones, or try to and those stuff, I would like to see some of the C and GNU make and other such assumptions removed from a make derivation, and then the current make derivation made on top of that. I'm just worried if we leave those assumptions in and then we try to fix up the other stuff, we're still going to be like overriding those in weird ways, and it's better to kind of pull the plug on that. Like if it didn't assume autoconf, like right now it assumes autoconf, and then you add CMake, and then the CMake just overrides that. But if it didn't assume either of those, and you were to depend on both things, then there should be some sort of conflict. Like, well, I don't know which configure phase you want. So we can get more strict about things once we clean up the assumptions, and then trying to turn other things into hooks will be less chaotic.
What if we had like per phase hooks? Does that make sense?
Isn't that what we have?
Yeah.
Yeah, we do have per phase hooks.
Oh, right.
Yeah, but it's right. I mean, the end goal we want is something that's safe to use with some basic assumptions where we adding something to the build inputs has an effect. Would be one of the basic kind of intuitions. And so if you had specified CMake already and were to add autoconf, but then nothing happened, that would be considered something we don't want. Not exactly sure if that's the right wording, but...
No, that sounds great.
Yeah.
So here's a question for all of you. Do we want to decide on against or for using Nixos modules for derivation builders? And from my point of view, main risk is performance issues, and main merit would be composability and types.
I would hold off on that for now. I get the benefits. I get that it avoids some of the modules everywhere problems, but I think it's important we like wrap up some easier success stories before going for a big change like that. I don't want to bite off more we can chew and then fail.
All right. Just for the record, I've noticed that it's pretty convenient to have such recursive data structure when building like a custom builders. At least I found it convenient in my that project of mine's. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the module system is the best way for configuring anything, really. It's very modular, it's composable, it has types, good error messages. The implementation isn't perfect. There are still some things that can be improved. Yeah. But yeah, the main disadvantage is really performance. I think we could try to make a prototype that uses the module system for packages, but then I think we'll soon realize that it's way too slow, or like 2 times slower or something, which then kind of disqualifies the option anyways.
It also has really high memory usage because it has to load everything.
Not necessarily. Like the way I see it is like one evaluation loop per derivation. So you really don't need to load nothing more than you actually need. And I guess you can check how I did it. There's a repository somewhere. I'll post in the chat.
All right. There is also module like for NixOS. Actually, because of submodules, a whole bunch of module evaluations are done all over the place. Like NixOS probably has like thousands of module evaluations, submodules and stuff.
Isn't the problem with NixOS module system as far as like memory that just everything gets evaluated even if it's not enabled?
Yes, that's how it's written, the actual Nixos module system, but it's just a function that accepts module definitions. So you really don't need to have like a single global module system. Like noted earlier, that's what I'm doing with Nix reinventing the wheel repository. I got like a one module evaluation loop per derivation.
Right, but even if you have a single derivations, you'll like assuming we have like 20 different builders, you still have to kind of evaluate the modules for all of those builders, even though you're enabling all of them, but just a single one or something like that.
No, you don't. Like,
right,
just imagine your Nixos configuration and importing file. Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think it's probably so one of the options is we try to make a prototype using the module system for.
Shall we
all the-
just rule this out because, well, you guys mentioned it that like it's going to be too slow?
Probably.
Because
it's
I'm
not-
just counting. I'm just telling that like memory shouldn't be an issue at all. That's all.
I didn't quite get that last sentence.
So all I'm saying is that memory should not be an issue at all because we won't be evaluating all the modules as NixOS does.
Okay.
But like we could just rule it out and forget about it, at least for time being.
Yeah. I was going to suggest that if it works out well, we could try to have Nix built in adopt a module system-like system.
So
But that's a bit out of scope since we
I
don't
was
really want to do
told
such
by
things.
Tom Berrick that supposedly Elko's next big thing after Flakes is integrated module system, so that's nice. And
Right.
yeah, but also like there are like a couple of like smaller built-ins that would help, like validating with JSON schema instead of like manually defining types, and like recursive update built-in would be nice.
Yeah, but that's a bit more
that's
in the
out of
future, I
scope,
think.
but yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, we are out of time for now.
Shall we? How about like one more solid question? Do we want to make a decision on the language? Last time we've been here, we discussed either Oil Shell or Ruby. I don't think there were anything else.
I think we kind of made some good arguments that the language isn't that important, that we don't need to make a decision for that right now.
Actually,
Maybe Oil Shell in the future.
I think that was my point at some point. Anyways.
Oh yeah. But yeah, I think most people agreed with that there's bigger problems right now. Bash sucks, but maybe we can kind of hide it as an implementation detail so we can more easily switch the language in the future.
Well, the thing that's keeping us to Bash is the Bash itself, because it's difficult to switch from it. Like, that's the point.
I mean, yeah, but most people don't actually have to write Bash. There's only right. But yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah, it's Bash that keeps us there. But yeah, does it sound good? Any other? Well, I guess if you have other things to say, I slacked a bit off with the meeting notes towards the end there. If you want to add some points there, that would be great. Otherwise, we can also check the meeting recording. But yeah, we're out of time. Thanks for participating, everybody. And yeah, have a nice evening. I'll see you next week, hopefully.
Thanks.